Alrighty, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the episode of GameSense tonight. We're so happy that you're here watching us live. I'm here at the WPI District event, so if you hear some jazz in the background or maybe a little 3, 2, 1, go, that's what it is, so don't be alarmed. I just want to say I'm Francis O'Rourke. I'm the host tonight. Joining us tonight are a few other people. We've got Evan Morrison from Team 5803. We've got Clint Bollinger. He's from Team 2337. We've got Nick Lawrence. He's from Team 3940. And our guest tonight is Justin. Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Oh, Justin, you should unmute your microphone too. One more time though. Uh-oh. Well, Justin, keep going with the microphone. I'll tell them a little bit about yourself. Justin's a coach and mentor on Team 118. They're the Robonauts from Houston, from Texas. They had a really great event last week. And we're going to keep on with the intro while Justin gets his microphone squared away. So first I want to say thank you to our show sponsor, Symbotic. They do some awesome stuff. Check them out at symbotic.com. They do automated warehouses that are really cool. Also, I want to let everybody know that we're doing a Q&A after the show. So if you've got questions for us, type it in with !Q followed by your question in the Twitch chat. And if we like it, we'll put it on air and answer it on air after the main part of the show. That'll be in about an hour or so. Also, I want to let everybody know that we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we hope, and we don't think that you guys should either. Have fun, and if you don't like what we have to say, go out there and prove us wrong. Well, everybody, I guess we could say that week one definitely happened. It definitely went off. Lots of things went down. Maybe that was a bad pun with Justin on the show. Maybe, I don't know. But Justin, how's your sound doing right now?
You tell me. You got me now?
Oh my God, it's beautiful, crispy.
All
Very
right.
good. Thanks. So, Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about the strategy and stuff? Actually, before, just why don't you tell us what your thing that you saw, your around the horn here for this week?
Yeah, my big takeaway from this week was climbing is really important. So it definitely hurts if you don't climb, and if you climb and fall, it hurts even worse. As you mentioned, we did that twice. So yeah, biggest takeaway from the week: climb every time. Don't fail.
Cool. What about you, Nick?
I feel exactly the same way as Justin does. I mean, when there were matches where we attempted to climb every match, but the matches that we just didn't get to the touchpad, it hurt. And climbing every single time, every single match is super, super important.
Cool. So, Clint, what's something that you noticed this week when you watched your week one events?
Definitely reiterating what everyone's saying about the climb, but also a lot of focus this week at gears. But I also saw a lot of people continue to go after the gears when they didn't need to keep going after those gears. And some people actually lost matches because they were going after a gear that got them no return on investment, and they missed their climb.
That's a very good point. Got to make sure you're following basic strategy. You're not doing anything silly. I wanted to say that we're going to talk about this more later in the show as well. But the field definitely had problems a lot this week. But the good news is that I'm at an event where we have a field that had problems last week, and it works. So now, don't quote me on that for the whole weekend, but
you might have just jinxed it, Francis.
I might have just jinxed it, but I want to say there's hope. In fact, we're running practice matches today at our day 0 of this district event. So I think it'll be good. We're gonna see what happens, but I think there's a lot of hope to be had. Evan, what is your thought about week one?
My big takeaway from week one is that fuel does matter, and it will continue to matter and matter more as we go through the weeks. My team 5803 was fortunate to be the number one pick at our district event, and we went on to win the event. And our alliance captain 4915 was probably the only reliable fuel scorer at the event, and they made their way to the number one seed on the back of that. And they really were shooting not high rate but high accuracy. They'd get their 10 in auto, and then they'd shoot throughout the rest of the match. They'd drop off one gear. They could do gears, and then they climb. But that fuel was the difference between a tie and a win in a lot of cases, right? And it gave us our alliance in playoffs the extra advantage that all we had to do was match our opponents on gears and match our opponents on climb, and we had the win in the bag. And so I think that's what we're going to see moving forward.
Okay, interesting. Well, that'll be. We'll talk more about the coming strategies later on in the show too. But let's start off with what happened with week one. So, Justin, why don't you start off the discussion? Tell us a little bit about the strategies that you saw at your events or at other events you may have watched this weekend.
Yes, we were in Hub City in Lubbock, and I would say the strategy mostly revolved around gear scoring. There was us, 2041, and maybe a couple other robots that were shooting balls at all. So the majority of the gameplay, especially in the quals, was gears back and forth. And then, of course, like we mentioned, climbing at the end. Big things that I saw out of the weekend was, I think we're going to talk about this a little more later, is defense. I think defense, I think our team had predicted defense was going to be relatively easy and impactful in this game. I think we predicted it. It was really, really strong in Hub City. Alliances were getting held to 2 rotors on the regular, especially in the elimination rounds. So defense was really hard. And then the penalties. I mean, we were talking about balls being the differentiator. I completely agree with that. I think balls do matter. When you're getting 2 rotors, your opponent's getting 2 rotors, you all climb. What's a differentiator? It's balls. Well, there's another differentiator, and that's penalties. And unfortunately, we saw that an awful lot in Hub City. I'm curious to know how the other tournaments were calling some of these things, but we were, especially the tech fouls in the loading zone, they were racking up sometimes 200, 250 points of penalties there. So there was a lot of matches in the eliminations, unfortunately, as well, that were decided on that particular penalty amongst others.
Yeah, that G13 penalty, I don't know if it's being called consistently across events at all. I definitely saw some events that was interpreting the rule as if you contacted a robot that was in the loading lane at all and you weren't in the loading station, then tech fouls are being unfortunately awarded for that in that situation, which may or may not be the correct interpretation of the rule. And then I did see some matches where it just wasn't called at all. So I think some focus on what the real correct interpretation of G13 is, that retrieval zone rule. I think some attention is needed there.
We also saw if a robot, let's say robot A, got pushed into that loading zone by robot B. If the refs determined that robot B was trying to go get a gear and they pushed the other robot into the loading zone by going to get a gear, they were calling those penalties. And that may be per the letter of the way it's written in the book, that you can cause your opponent to get a penalty in that particular case. But man, when you're that lift is really close to the loading zone on that side. Yeah. So it's just a tough area, and it's really easy to get those penalties.
Yeah, the Kettering finals match 2 was determined by 50 points and penalties from that ruling. And the robot was trying to play defense, preventing people from getting gears. But like you said, they got shoved into the loading zone and picked up 2 tech fouls, and it caused them not to win the match.
So I kind of want to ask, Justin especially, do you guys think that a lot of this is sort of what we'll say the normal week 1 scenario where we have a lot of teams that are inexperienced getting penalties? Or do you think that this game is a game that has lots of, is inherently going to be high penalties for a very long time?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I definitely think, I know our team in particular, we're having, say, in the qual matches, robots, you should play defense. Maybe the third best robot, why don't you go play defense? And we were telling them to play defense where we think it's really effective, right around that right, and the line basically will say in front of the loading zone area. And then we quickly realized that's really dangerous, especially with some of these, I'll call them third robots, but the defense type robots. And we went away from that strategy. So I think there is some learning pains on those penalties. We didn't recognize how horrible they would be, how easy they would be to get. So I think we'll definitely change strategy a little bit in future tournaments.
I think there was some confusion as well about the hands and limbs, and I think that's S07, the reaching outside the airship, because the blog post made it appear that in general minor protrusions were going to be okay. But really, the team update that came out yesterday clarified that it's really basically anything to do with either untangling a rope on the carriage or operating the gear carriage is when it's okay to have minor protrusions that aren't below the deck of the airship. But it basically implied that you can't, like, at some events this was being called as okay, you can't reach down and grab a gear off of the lift instead of pulling it all the way into the airship. So there was definitely some inconsistencies that way through this past weekend, which led to some yellow cards at some events and none at others.
It's a Band-Aid for a Band-Aid, right? They tried to make it where the handle doesn't fall outside of the airship, but the fix caused it, at least at Southfield when I was looking at the field, you had to actually have the angle of the panel, and the hanging piece would be outside of the ship. The only way for you to pull up a gear was to reach your hand out, and there was refs day one that were calling a yellow card every single time that happened.
Yeah, talk about week one learning pains. I think the pilots in general, that was week one learning pains.
Yeah.
There isn't really a way to practice that. You have your drivers practice. Having pilots practice is hard. A lot of teams don't have airships. We built an airship, and it's still, there's so much going on in a match. It's hard to have them practice that. In addition, they added that little PVC ring to get the so you couldn't fall, the string wouldn't fall over. Well, that caused some problems, and that got tangled up lots of times. So, I saw a lot of pilot errors, but those kids got a lot to do during a match.
Yeah, for sure. And to go off of what Clinton's point was as well, that I think with the ring at the top now, sometimes you'll get the lift all the way up, and in order to get it to pull into the airship, you actually have to grab the top of the carriage because it's right up where that ring is. Yep. And so I think a lot of those problems, I'm hoping a lot of those inconsistencies in the way it was called was due to the fact that it was essentially a rule update via blog post. And it was not officially written into the rules yet. We didn't have exact wording, and so there was some open to interpretation of exactly what the intent of the update was, because it was a mid-event update. And now that it's in the rules with a blue box that clarifies that it's really intended just for the manipulation of the carriage, so the string and the carriage lift itself, and not for the gears, that will help. That'll help consistency across events. I think it will be interesting to see as some of these teams who competed week one go to their second events, especially in districts, to see if how they handle that, because now they're going to be fundamentally operating under potentially a different set of rules, or a different way it's called.
At the same time, I'm hoping that First isn't done looking at this either. I think there's alternative solutions that allow for you to get what you want out of it. One of the ones that I saw some of the FTAs after the events kind of in the evening testing was tethering the rope instead of right at the opening, putting it all the way up at the bar. So then the rope never goes outside. You can always grab the rope inside the arena, and you don't have to give the slack back to the carriage to be able to bring it back. Yeah. The other one that I saw was putting small panels right next to the metal piece in the opening, so the handle can't get kicked out of the starship or spaceship, whatever.
Yeah,
I like spaceship though.
Spaceship, that's a good starship, airship, boat, treehouse. Yeah, and they're all the same
next
thing.
Year's theme.
Yeah, right.
First in space. All right. So speaking of the field and all that, let's talk a little bit about the field issues we've had. So obviously, I think anybody who played last week at an event saw something happen to varying degrees, whether it was as simple as just maybe some robots were having trouble connecting, or some difficulty putting the field together, or multi-hour delays due to numerous issues. So Evan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys saw there, quick?
Sure, yeah, and this also is, it's a little bit concerning hearing Clinton talk about the FTAs playing around with some other things, because there's only so much that you really want the field to change during competition weeks. It's like at some point we just kind of have to say it is what it is. This is how it's going to work, hopefully. But I mean, there was kind of problems with every part of the field. Anything that had a sensor or a light or a motor or something powered.
The load stations worked fine. The load stations, those never failed.
Yeah, well, actually, not
Gears
according
always
to some
slid
people
down.
at Palmetto and other areas where apparently the loading stations weren't at the correct height. You know, and by not at the correct height, we mean they're off by like 3/4 of an inch or something, but that's still technically, you know, maybe outside the field spec, certainly out of the drawing spec. So anybody who's been around First for a while hopefully understands that those kinds of hard-mounted field elements are not often particularly accurate, and, you know, sort of design around that, but it can certainly catch some teams off guard. The thing that I think a lot of people either weren't prepared for, or just there's nothing you can do about it, are things like the touchpads and the rotor sensors and the serializers counting fuel. I know we saw and the springs, right? The springs just getting damaged so quickly and so beyond repair. So I'll start with the springs. Well, in general, the event that we were at, 5803, was at Auburn Mountain View. Our event ran incredibly smoothly for a week 1 event, especially with all the other issues being had. But I mean, we had damage to springs. We had weak springs. We tried to, you know, the field crew tried to replace them when we could. During opening ceremonies on day 2, it was a Saturday-Sunday event, so it was on Sunday. They announced that they'd replaced the springs the night before, and that was the set that we were playing through qualifications with, because they had to save the rest of them for playoffs. They were going to put a new set on for playoffs, and they had to be prepared for that. So, you know, it was kind of like just an eye opener of just how quickly they're going through these things.
Yeah.
And I know there's been some discussion, and there was some mention in the blog post earlier last week about maybe adjusting the mounting or something to help with this. But there's been no further word on that. So that'll be interesting. We also saw some touchpad false positives and false negatives. So robots that were clearly not touching the pad or had fallen off, and the touchpad light was still triggered, which caused some interesting issues and discussions and revised match scores. And we saw some touchpads that looked like they should have been clearly triggered that didn't turn on. So that's most of what we saw. There wasn't a whole lot of fuel shooting, so it's hard to talk about the serializers.
I can actually talk a little bit the serializers in mostly a positive way. I was part of the crew that was setting up the field at the Tippecanoe district in Indiana, and it was a long night. But the quickest part of setup was actually setting up the serializers. It was pretty much boom, done, turn them on, make sure they spin the right direction, run a few balls through, and go. The only issue that the serializers had at our event was actually a match that my team was playing, Team 3940 Cybertooth. In the middle of us scoring like a 20-25 straight salvo, the power supply just died, and the serializer just shut off. Other than that, like, everybody was like, "Oh, the serializer is going to jam every 5 matches or so." No, none of that happened. Even when it was being peppered with fuel, which was, I guess, not the norm. There was a few matches where it didn't jam. And I'm happy to say that the serializer, when power supply works, it works. So there's a bit of a positive on all these field issues.
It is one of those
around the serializer.
It is one of those weird things that things that spin need power to move.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is interesting though is the serializer motors and the lift motors. They get crazy hot because they're running all the time. To the point where my team was traveling back and forth for this event. We pulled a couple extra motors out of our pit just to make sure that if they had to burn through the allotment that first had sent them, which didn't end up being the case, the motors survived just fine, that we would have them for them. But the serializers were basically fine at our event.
Yeah, I brought a case of mini sims and bag motors to Kettering just in case.
Wow. Okay. So Justin, let's talk. I hope this isn't like a sore subject necessarily, but can you talk a little bit about your experience with the davit and sort of like what you saw and how it affected your rope performance? Maybe we'll say.
Yeah. I want to be real careful not to blame the davits. There's things that I wasn't real happy about with the field this last week. We fell twice. I did feel the davits, and one of them felt pretty sharp to where I definitely could see that nicking ropes, including ours. And I think that could have had something to do with it. I think probably more to do with it is that we've got 6 motors and a power takeoff that's really driving hard. Now that's a 1,000
That's what
pound
happened to
strap.
Hot.
Yeah, 1,000-pound strap. The numbers say we shouldn't have broke it. So I think when we go up, we're swinging pretty violently, and then maybe it's getting a little bit of nick, and that strap's getting damaged, and now it's not 1,000 pounds. It's more like 300 pounds or something like that.
Right.
So I do think that the davits could have caused the problem, but I'm not going to say for sure that that's why we fell. I think that it has more to do with how much power we were pulling. We never saw this at home, and our davits at home are nice and smooth. But again, I don't know. I don't know why this is the first time, and many times that we've tried to climb that we fell, and then we did it twice in a row. So it was an unusual circumstance, and I don't want to blame the davits.
Okay, that's good. What else did you guys see at Hub City? Did you see anything weird? Like, do you guys? I guess maybe you guys obviously did a lot of gear stuff. Did you have any idea why these springs are breaking, or if there's any actions that kind of cause wear more than others?
We saw these springs breaking at our practice field very, very early on. So I think I knew about these spring problems. I just don't know if they had a good solution to it. And I don't know if there is a good solution to it. We saw springs at Hub City that our drivers would basically tell me, hey, the right spring, that one's unusable. No one's been able to put a gear on that, and we just had to work around it. We knew don't go to the right spring. They get hit often, they bend, and then some springs we just know are weaker than others. You put a gear on the right spring and it droops really, really, basically the gear falls off. You go to the center spring and it doesn't fall off. So
yeah,
we just kind of took that with ideally all the springs are the same and they don't break. I kind of think it's part of the game. We just have to deal with it. Maybe they come up with a better solution.
Yeah, actually, at the Granite State District this weekend, I wasn't there, but I heard from some folks like Ty who were. They said that they actually put some gaff tape over some of those sharp corners in an attempt to sort of reduce the roughness of it. I don't know if it actually helped or not, but people are trying. I mean, at Granite State, they had a couple of issues. I know that there was a peculiar issue where a certain robot was causing, like, every other robot to get kicked off of the field. And it was localized to just them or their driver station. But I think that overall Granite State ran pretty well, all things considered, compared to what we saw at other events. Like, for example, down in Waterbury, Connecticut, we had, everybody's yelling for ropes on the field. So down in Waterbury, Connecticut, they ended up having to do a lot of assembly of the field when it got arrived to them. So they ended up not finishing setup until an hour after qualification matches were scheduled to start, which is kind of a bit of a pain in the butt. But I mean, they ended up working through it, getting on time, and I think the volunteers made everything work, which is, I guess, the one good thing about this whole situation.
I think another issue with a lot of people climbing, from what I've seen, like I said, we haven't played yet. We're going to be playing this weekend. But a lot of things that we've seen is that with the delay in the trigger light, because it does take a second to turn on, you have teams who are over climbing or over driving their lift, and it's causing to put more stress and strain on that rope than is probably necessary to count the climb. And most of the teams that I will say that I have seen falling are good teams. They are teams that are consistently out there performing, competing like crazy. And it's because, that team, their drive team, is told, if you don't get that climb, something's going to happen. So that driver says, no light, keep climbing, right? And that's when I think people are actually breaking it. So for people that are going to be playing this weekend, maybe have a little faith that when you touch the pad, it is going to count. Don't go there with 1 second left. Go there with 5. It's so worth it to make sure you get that climb and to make sure you don't overclimb. Like I said, that's what I saw from this weekend. I saw, let's see here, I think I saw probably like 4 to probably 7 different robots fall. Not different robots, just falls that happened. And some of them, big name teams, 67, 107, and a couple others. Like I said, they're big name teams that are falling, and you wouldn't think that they would be falling.
And like the springs, at this point, I kind of see this as part of the game challenge, and it was something that we all knew. We all knew that the touchpad took a second to trigger. We all knew that C channel hung at the same level as the touchpad, and we all knew there was these 9-degree bends. So we maybe made some wrong decisions on our climb, but I don't blame the field for that. I think I think that it's part of the challenge.
I think it could have some simple solutions to help everyone, to help save robots, to help save the floor of the event.
Yeah.
If whether you turn a green light on when you touch the pad and it turns blue or red once you complete the climb. You know what I mean? Something very, very little like that, I think, will save a lot of robots and save. I mean, people have worked 6 weeks. They spent, thousands of dollars on these robots, registration. No one needs to have a robot fall on their head and to have the damage that you guys had with your robot.
I think with regard to Springs, though, I think First is nearing a political uphill battle in the sense that there are districts that have points accumulated already, and if they make that challenge a lot easier, the robots that succeeded like week 1 or even week 2, because it doesn't appear they're going to make many major changes this weekend, they might be a little salty that they succeeded week 1 with a spring that is, say, not optimal, and they designed around that, and then all of a sudden they make it easier, and suddenly the robot's a little undervalued. I know if I was in that situation, I would be split, because I'd be like, well, okay, my kids figured it out, we got to figure it out. I feel kind of screwed by it, but at the same time, I'm happy that everybody can play at the same level that I'm at too. So I'd be totally torn if I was one of those teams.
Yeah, I gotta say that I think that in these situations you gotta kind of just do it and make it better, because I don't like week 1 has always been kind of a crapshoot in the history of First, right? Like week 1 is kind of those words that send chills up your spines no matter what the game is, even Recycle Rush. But I think that fixing it's a good thing. And if you're salty about it, then go post on Chief Delphi, because that's where salt belongs. But that's a different topic. Justin, you were going to talk about the hoppers, I think, right?
Yeah, we were just talking about field issues. We didn't see any of the problems that you mentioned about the touchpad triggering. That sounds interesting to me. It's the first I heard that. One thing we did see that I don't know if anyone else saw was hoppers not triggering. We ran an auton and really rammed that hopper hard, and it didn't trigger. And I was like, man, maybe we must have missed it. And someone says, we did not miss that hopper. Walked over there. I could push the trigger pad in, and it did not. It didn't fall down. The hopper itself had moved, so it had basically shifted with robots hitting the wall and stuff to where it had kind of gotten pushed back, and the trigger pad wouldn't let the floor fall down. So it sounds like there was supposed to be Velcro that keeps those in place, and just with all the field setup problems, they never got that Velcro there. But that was something that kind of surprised a lot of us, and that. Before the match, everyone would check all the springs, and then we would go to the hoppers and make sure the hoppers were set in the exact right spot. It's kind of a pre-match check for that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's a really good tip.
Trigger the hopper right before your match, just to make sure.
The field reset got a little angry with me when I was I was showing why the hopper wasn't working, and then I accidentally triggered the hopper in that process. So they weren't real happy about that.
Oh boy!
Just like I saw
one. No, sorry. I saw one instance where a hopper triggered, and one half the balls came out just fine, and the other half it just completely jammed. And so you've got 50 balls sitting in a triggered hopper just not going anywhere. That was interesting. And I've heard at some other events that they were foghorning matches for that, or at least a volunteer would come and stick their hand in it and kick it out or something. But I didn't see it very often, but I did see it once, and I was just very confused by this because it's not something that you would expect would happen particularly frequently.
Is that when you have to get the Shrek out and get the Shrek to kick the balls out of the hoppers?
The halfway jam is actually a thing that happened to our team. We were playing a match, and we did the mythical thing of the hopper side that we were trying to go for triggered, and the other side jammed. We were like, huh, that's interesting. So we came back and tried to trigger it again, and it took like 6 or 7 rams for it to trigger. It was almost like the field border itself moving is what caused the hopper to trigger, not the actual trigger itself, which kind of speaks to the not being Velcro down issue that Justin mentioned. So yeah, we were confused, and it only happened once, and it never happened again at our event. It was really strange.
Well, I guess the last thing I'll sort of talk about, and I sort of mentioned this earlier, is that I think that as we go, like with many weeks, especially week 1s, we're going to see things get better and fixed. It will be interesting to see what this week looks like, especially at regional events, because some of the things are easy to fix, like getting more springs or making sure hoppers in the right position. Some of the things like the serializers, the boilers, if they're actually having issues, it's going to take more procedural diligence to just make sure that they're looked at more often. But we'll see. Did I just trigger you, Nick, with that sound of the field turning on?
It bothers me because it's set to the wrong speed.
I'll change the dip switches for you.
Oh, thanks.
All right, let's move on to our next topic here. Let's talk a little bit about defense. So obviously, we talked about this last week as well. Being able to stop somebody from putting up a rotor can be a huge points shift and can make a huge difference. And Justin, you guys mentioned you guys had a lot of defense at your event. Why don't you take it away and start off the discussion?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it before. There's an area of the field that lots of robots want to go to get gears, and it's pretty narrow. There's a wall on one side and there's the airship on the other side. It doesn't take much to play, perpendicular to the field and run back and forth and stop robots from getting to their gears. And they say, okay, well, I drive around the airship. I drive around the airship, and all of a sudden you're blind for part of that, which is really difficult. And it's a lot shorter distance for that defending robot to get you on the other side. So that's a I don't want to say chokehold, but that's a really difficult spot to get around defense. In addition, we saw a lot of defense that I didn't think we would see on the far end of the field. So I thought before seeing the game played that on our side, when we're putting gears on pegs, we're going to be pretty safe there. The defending robots have poor sight lines; they're way on the other side of the field, so we'd be pretty safe. That wasn't necessarily the case. It was pretty easy for robots just to keep on hitting you and kind of pinning you into those gear stations, and playing pretty effective defense on placing the gear on the peg, which was surprising.
Yeah, I noticed that too. When we were in quarterfinals, there was some really good defense, actually all the way through playoffs, but it was most prevalent in quarterfinals when we weren't expecting it. Because since we were first pick, we were boiler side driver station. So our driver would prefer to go put gears on that side peg facing the boiler as opposed to the rear peg. And we started having some pretty intense defense being played on us by our airship over there, which is a safer place to play defense from a penalty standpoint, because the only penalty you can get over there is if you spend more than 5 seconds in the key, which if you're just defending a peg is not likely to happen. And so we pretty quickly transitioned to, even though it was suboptimal sight line for our driver, to swinging around and placing it on the center peg where we really were protected from pretty much all the defense. I think it'll be really interesting when teams start shooting more, especially the teams that are sort of key shooters from right up against the boiler, because that's almost the same area. And I think they're going to see maybe a little bit more defense than they expect if they're shooting during normal teleop period in that region.
Yeah, I'll say I think we had pretty decent gear runners out there, and teams were getting stopped. They were not getting their third rotor on the regular. You need 6 gears, and you start with 3 in off time. So say running 3 or 4 cycles down the field. I would not have predicted that you'd be able to stop a team from getting the third rotor so easily, and it was happening all the time. I left that regional saying 12 gears, the 4th rotor is never going to happen. Then I find out in New England it was happening all the time. So yeah. Obviously there was a different level of defense being played up there, but much like last year, I'm not exactly sure how the game's going to play out if teams choose to go full offense versus playing defense. I think unlike last year, the defense is so easy to play that I think at the high levels and even at Worlds, we're not going to see 4 rotors.
It's that New England defense at it again or something like that.
Yeah.
New England offense.
Yeah. Well,
I think
one of the interesting things is, especially if you go watch video of that New England Alliance, which I think we actually have video of them. This was 5687, the Outliers, who was just blisteringly fast, along with 1058 PVC Pirates, and I'm blanking on who their third partner was. But all 3 of them are running gears, and 5687 is taking the brunt of the defense over there, but it's essentially leaving their 2 partners free to score gears at will. And so, for one, it's an amazing display of coordination between 3 Alliance members. 4908, that's the third partner. But it gets really crowded if you're trying to run more than 2 robots back and forth across the field at each of the ends where there's choke points. But in this match, 5687 only gets like 3 or 4 gears on, right? And they're like the one that everybody's like, oh my God, they're so amazing. They can do 7 gears. Well, yeah, but while you're double teaming 5687 to keep them from doing 7, their partners are doing, the other 4 or 5 that they needed to do to get to 12 rotors. Yeah, so I think it's really a case where if you have good enough partners that can shoulder the load, it becomes incredibly difficult to play good defense on 3 members of an alliance that are scoring. Whereas if you get 1 or 2.
Yeah, these guys are real squirrely. They just go around the field and just kind of avoid everybody as best they can and draw their fire, like you were saying. Nick, I think you want to talk a little bit about defense too, right?
Yeah, I have a non-gear defense strategy that came out only once at the Tippecanoe district.
Spicy.
Yeah, so it was a match with 1024 against 1529. Now, 1024 the kilobytes, they built a shooting robot that doesn't have a ground gear intake. They rely entirely on the hoppers. And 1529 said, to heck with it with fuel, we're going to build a crazy fast drivetrain, do gears, and climb. So what 1529 did when they played against 1024 is the first thing they did in the match was trigger all the hoppers. 1024 could not shoot. They got to all the hoppers before 1024 did, so all that 1024 shot was their auto balls. And it was like, holy crap. This is a really cool thing to do. The thing is, though, is 1529 spent the whole time doing that while 1024 was running gears. But I still would have made that call if I was 1529, knowing that they had their gear intake off the robot. That was like the most valuable thing they could do during that match, because you don't know for sure if 1024 was going to go grab a hopper real quick and try to shoot some at the end of the match. And I was surprised to see that was. I didn't hear of it happening elsewhere. I'm hoping somebody else did, because that was like day one what our students said would be a thing, and that's like the reason why we have a ground intake for our fuel.
We call that a Tazbot. That's the nickname that we called it. Is Tazbot. All they do is go out there like a Tasmanian devil and trigger all the hoppers.
That's awesome.
No, Bare Metal 2046 at our event didn't have a ground intake, a fuel intake on their robot, and they had one of the few shooters that could actually score balls in the boiler at the event. And so that was a strategy that was employed against them in at least one quals match. And we were planning to do it again. And kind of after discussion with alliance partners, it wasn't worth playing the strategy against them, because it does also have the ability to screw up your own alliance partners if they have trouble scoring gears over a stack of fuel, etc. But one thing that kind of surprised me, and it sounds like 1024 didn't do this either. There is 20 fuel that starts, or more if your alliance partners don't preload fuel, that starts over at the loading lane, and so that's a protected area where you can go load up on fuel. So I'm expecting to see that a little bit in future weeks with the sort of non-ground intake robots that they start going over. We even saw over to the loading lanes.
We even saw some events that were using hopper and fuel as being shrapnel to be on the floor. They would strategically trigger certain hoppers at certain ends of the field to try to get in the way of loading at the load station or placing gears onto the pegs.
We saw that. I'll say one other thing on defense. So already established it's effective in this year's game. The other thing is that, much like 2014, completely flat, open field, and robots that are built for speed, defense is really brutal. We had several really high-speed collisions, and outside of the damage we took from the falls, we had some pretty significant damage to our robot just from hits. There's rules against not going inside a robot's frame perimeter. That stuff happens. It's hard to say who initiated the contact, so it doesn't get called. And it doesn't really matter when your robot takes that damage, if a penalty was called on it. So one of our big takeaways from Hub City was we've got some systems that we need to make a lot more robust. Our robot is entirely within at least the bumper zone. So we were taking a lot of hits, and we're not extending way outside of our bumpers. I was glad after this weekend that we didn't do that. If I had a robot that really extended way outside in front of the bumpers, I'd be worried about, or I'd be making sure that was really robust, because there's a lot of high-speed collisions out there.
Yeah, for sure. And also just making sure your bumpers are attached robustly. Especially in 2014, there weren't as many teams that had bumper cutouts, right? Because there was no way you were fitting that huge ball through a bumper cutout anyway. This year, I see a lot of teams with dual-sided cutouts or with split bumpers, including us. And it's really easy, if you don't make your bumper connection robust, for somebody to come screaming across the field, catch a corner, and off comes half your bumper, and then you're disabled. We saw it happen to some really good teams this weekend, multiple times, on different teams. Just not, a bumper attachment that would have been totally fine last season, or maybe in a previous year, and just or was viable if you had full wrap bumpers. But as soon as you split it down the middle, it has a way to get out.
Yeah, and it's kind of too bad that I feel like the historical memory of people with bumpers is so short that people just sort of forget this and build bumpers that fall off relatively easily, and it's kind of just too bad. But I guess the next question is, what are we thinking of going forward? What defense is going to look like? Do you think it's going to basically stay the same for week 2, or do you think that people are going to smarten up and start doing things differently for this event, for this upcoming week?
I think you're going to see, because it's so early, week 2, you're probably going to see pilots that are smarter because they've been watching, but I think you're still going to see a lot of the same of gear and climb city. It's still kind of early to say that, suddenly everybody's going to turn on their shooters and it's going to work. I think you might see a bunch of teams try it, primarily because they saw that, especially, there were events that were tied 3 rotors, and 3 climbs on each side of the field, that you would, I think that you would see, I think I jumped the topic. I'm sorry. I think that you're going to see, people try it just because they think it's going to matter, but they're not going to be good enough at it to make that difference yet, because they haven't had the time to really tune it in.
And I think a key point there is, if you're going to shoot fuel, shoot an auto, right?
Yes.
If you score 2 or 3 of your starting 10 fuel in auto, that makes a difference in a match, and that's a lot more efficient use of your fuel and your time than trying to shoot in teleop. And if you're making 3 out of your 10 balls, that every 10 balls that you shoot, right, that can actually contribute to a winning score in auto, whereas an extra 1 point, it can, right, but that's a lot of time that you're spending during the match to get that.
Yeah.
And I think from a defensive standpoint, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot different until teams really start shooting better. Or teams start figuring out ways to get around the defense that's being played, because the choke point defense is really effective right now at slowing teams that are doing gears down. Other than getting more wise to those penalties near the loading lanes, you can completely take an alliance that could do 3 or maybe even be capable of 4 rotors and take them down to 2 with one really good defensive robot in the right spot.
Yeah, I think you guys kind of hit the nail on the head that, I know that week 1 is kind of a boogeyman, and I even said it earlier, but week 2 kind of lives in this even more peculiar space where all the robots there's very few robots that play back to back. And so notwithstanding one of the people that are here, but so most of these robots are just as green as week 1, but they have the knowledge that they've seen in week 1. So it ends up being this weird situation where you can either see things completely shift, or basically just either refine themselves to a almost twisted degree, right? Like you may see people completely eschew shooting completely. Absolutely nobody even tries their shooters whatsoever. Or you may see people see that defense works and begin to just absolutely wreck face out there. What were you going to say, Clint?
I've heard of some local teams even considering removing their shooters and going to purely gear systems because their shooters they don't believe is up to par. Like I said, no big names or anything like that, but a couple of the, I'll say younger sophomore type teams that saw what happened this week and said, hey, our shooter isn't even close to being good. We're going to take it off and we're going to focus all on gears. I do think that this weekend you're going to see more people going for the point the robot at the boiler and shoot the 10 balls, right? You're going to have people that know that, hey, those 10 balls might make the difference between winning the match and losing the match, even if we only make 2 or 3 of them. I also think that, I'm going to go on a limb here, I think that you're going to actually see a little bit of an increase in rotors in week 2. However, come week 3 and beyond, I think you're going to dip back down and see that the 4 rotors and stuff like that are actually going to decrease in like week 3. But I think it might spike a little bit and maybe even peak this weekend.
Interesting.
Justin, I want to hear your take on this. What do you think things are going to look like after we've seen what happened with week 1?
Yeah, I think maybe we already saw a little bit of this in week 1. I said before, I think it's a 3-rotor game where we're going to get 3 rotors, you're going to get 3 rotors. And then it's kind of like who does that the quickest? And then after you get your 3 rotors, well, there's no point in running gears anymore. So what are you going to do? Well, if you can shoot balls, you're going to shoot balls. And if you can't, you're going to probably play defense on either them getting their gears or them getting their shooting their balls. So I think what you're going to see is kind of like in 2014 where we typically see maybe the 3rd robot. They're the defense bot. They're going to play defense the whole match. I think you could see a bunch of offense and then a bunch of defense, and it could be the first, second pick that is playing the defense. For us, this tournament, we not much on the robot worked after falling a couple times. We were kind of stuck playing defense because of that. But we found, man, we're really good at playing defense. We're holding them to the number of rotors that we're getting, so it doesn't really matter that we weren't scoring gears anyway. And it turned out to be a pretty effective strategy. So I think that's kind of some way I think it evolves.
Yeah, I mean that was.
Go ahead, Evan.
That was our whole game plan in playoffs, given that we had the best fuel scoring robot at our event as our alliance captain. Was we need to match the other alliance on rotors, we need to match the other alliance on climbs, and we went, basically, right? Now, there's some differences because of penalties or whether or not you got the extra 20 bonus from the auto gear, but that's, I think, going to be the name of the game almost throughout the season, is, whether it's 2 rotors, 3 rotors, or 4 rotors, match them on rotors, match them on climb, get more fuel, right? That's the only way you can differentiate yourself as the fuel. I'm hoping we see some more coming out this weekend.
Yep, that's true. And really quickly before we go on to our last couple topics here, I want to say that like Justin was saying, how he found out that his team plays really good defense. It's one of those things that I think people kind of forget about, is that playing defense is not about having a drivetrain that is like 400,000 to 1 and just pushing people across the field. It's all about positioning. And what that leads to is it leads to, surprisingly, a lot of the best offensive drivers are the best defensive drivers, because if you can control everything, you can make it work. And I think we'll, like Justin said, I think this is going to be a game as we go forward too, that we're going to see a lot more defense happening, sort of like what we saw with 2014. People are going to do a little bit of both as we go, so we'll see how it goes. But so with that, let's get to some of the other top stuff we're talking about this week. So one of those shows we also produced this year during build season was Check-In. We had 6 great teams on, and they've been competing. 4 of them competed last week, and 3 of them are competing this week. So that means 7, but we'll show you in a second. So 3940, Cybertooth. You guys were the number 6 alliance captain, right? And you guys made it to quarterfinals and won the imagery award. Woo! Congratulations. And you guys are getting ready for this week, right?
Yep.
Cool. What are you guys working on between your first and second event?
Our absolute number 1 priority was making sure we climb every time. We had some climbing jamming issues where the rope would bunch up in certain areas where it wasn't supposed to go in our climber. So we spent the last few days making sure we get that climb every time before we even gone back to touching shooting or even gears.
Nice. Cool. Well, in other news, we got some other teams that played. Team 319, they made it to the quarterfinals of the Granite State District, and they won the Judges Award. Great job there, guys. They'll be competing in a couple of weeks. We also had 3847 Spectrum. They actually ended up beating Justin's team in the semifinals and going on to the finals, not winning the whole tournament, but they also did that, and they won the EI award. Great job, Spectrum, and all the folks there. That's a great performance. Good to see there. Also, big news, 5803, Evan and Stephanie's team, they actually won the Auburn Mountain View District in the Pacific Northwest. Congratulations, guys. On top of that, you also got yourselves the Industrial Design Award, right?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. It was a pretty incredible event for us. So we got a couple weeks to try and make some improvements and go out and do it again.
Very cool. All right, well, this week coming up, Clint's team, 2337, they're going to be competing in Michigan. And also, we've got Team 148 competing. And like I said before, Nick's team, 3940, they're going to be competing this weekend as well. So good luck to all you guys. We'll check in on what you guys did at competition next week. So the last topic before we take our short break is going to be shout-outs. This is the part where we shout out somebody cool or something we want to talk about real quick. So first off, the first shout-out is by our director, Stephanie. Stephanie is behind the scenes running the show. And her shout-out is to Team 4488, Team Shockwave. They're competing at the Wilsonville District in the Pacific Northwest. They're a team that came guns blazing onto the scene early in their years. Last year was a bit of an off year for them, but they still had a quite good robot. And I'm really excited, and she's really excited. I'm really excited actually to see who they what they're gonna be doing this year as well. So good luck to Shockwave. I want to shout out to all the volunteers out there. I have a saying that, good job, guys. I'm surrounded by them right now, so they don't have trust me, they're not holding me hostage, I promise. But I want to say that great job to all of them, because one thing for sure, no matter how bad things get, if you have a group of people like First Volunteers together, they will make it happen. If you have a good group of volunteers, they will make your event happen. They will make the experience as best as they can for all the teams. So if you're volunteering this week, or if you volunteered last week, thank you, and please keep that in mind. Remember that you guys can make it work no matter how bad things are, but I think it's going to get better. Evan, who are you shouting out to this week?
Cool. Well, I'm giving a shout out to one of my favorite teams to watch on the field and off the field every year, 987, the High Rollers. They just debuted a super sweet looking robot, Blackout, with a turreted shooter and a ground gear pickup. And it's just looks like another fantastic machine. They're competing at Utah this weekend. And then my other shout out is to Team 6343 Steel Ridge Robotics, rookie team out here in Pacific Northwest that we've been kind of helping out remotely. Jeff Brink, rookie coach, but has done some amazing job with that team. And so they're competing at Wilsonville this weekend. Good luck to you guys. We're rooting for you.
Awesome. That sounds great. Nick, who are you shouting out this week?
My shout out is to all the teams competing at the brand new Shenzhen Regional in China. The first year for that event, and first year for China to have an in-season FRC event, but specifically also a shout out to my coworker and friend Daniel Bravo, who's the FTA at that event, who's on his FTA World Tour. Last week he was in Mexico. This week he's in China being the FTA at that Shenzhen Regional.
Wow, that sounds pretty dope. I kind of wish I had that job almost. Cool.
Can you imagine the competition hangover on top of jet lag, though?
Yeah. Oh boy,
that's
brutal.
If you go in the right order, it's really good, and if you go in the wrong order, it's really bad.
Clint, who are you shouting out this week?
I think I'm going to shout out the 8 Michigan teams traveling down to Indiana to see what they can do down there. I'm going to also shout out to 2960, who's competing down there. They won the Southfield event with the Killer Bees this weekend. We'll see if they can come back with another blue banner for Michigan.
Awesome. All right. And last but certainly not least, our guest tonight, Justin. Justin, who do you want to talk about this week?
I'll shout out to 148. On our team, we call it the Robo Wrangler Depression. When they release their video, they always release their video quite early when we're still frantically putting our robot together. And we look at that video, and it usually blows us away. And we say, why didn't we think of that? And that definitely happened this year. The robot looks really awesome. I believe they're debuting in Dallas this weekend. And one of the things about that team is that they pretty much on the regular come out of the box super strong. So I'm always impressed by how well they perform their first regional, and I'm expecting a good performance this weekend, and we'll be cheering them on.
Cool. Do you have anybody else you want to shout out?
Yeah, so I'll also shout out to my alma mater, Team 27. They were playing up in Minnesota last weekend. Always like to see them do well. I believe they got to the finals there before they got knocked out. It looks like they got some cool stuff going on their robot. So wish them the good luck in the rest of the season as well.
Cool. All right. Well, guys, thank you for joining me, and a big thanks to Justin for being our guest this week. We love having you on. This is the second time you've been on, and it's great to hear from you and all your experiences you had this year. So
yeah, thanks for the invite. I love coming on. You guys do a great job with this show, and it's always a fun time.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Justin. We appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a really quick break, guys. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll come right back, and we're going to do our Q&A segment for a few questions. Again, if you've got questions, send them in with exclamation mark Q, followed by your question in the Twitch chat, and we'll answer it. And in the meanwhile, while we're on our break, I'm going to take a little bit of a ride. We'll see in a second. But guys, thank you for joining us. We'll see you guys back in just a moment. So stay tuned and send us in your questions. We'll be right back. All righty, welcome back, everybody. We're here live from the WPI District. I'm getting ready to take off. We're going home soon, so got to spin up me some rotors and get this bad boy into gear. I hear.
Francis, you broke the field.
All right, good job, guys. That was good. All right.
Sorry, everybody who's at the WPI district. Francis just broke the field. You're going to have some delays tomorrow.
I don't know what to tell you. All right, so we actually do have questions. If you've got a question, send it in with !Q followed by the question in the Twitch chat. All right, so yeah, we're on GameSense, dude. All right, so let's get our first question up on the screen, and I'll try my best to read it from here on the airship on my tiptoes. This is from Ballgain here. He asked, if you're pretty sure you'll get 3.5 rotors, do you start playing bump and run defense right away, or wait to play D until you've got the third rotor? Okay, bump and run defense. Try to figure out this question to make sure I understand what he's trying to say.
I think when he's talking about bump and run defense, he's talking about kind of playing defense while you're playing offense. So going a little bit out of your way during your cycles to slow the other alliance down, knowing that you've got some buffer on your quest to get 3 rotors. So rather than going all out to hit your 3 rotors as quickly as possible and then going play defense, you kind of play defense throughout each of your cycles. You know, a hit here, a little jimmy there, you know, and then as soon as they get past you, then you go put your gear on. It's a really interesting question, and I think it comes down to how confident you are in being able to get your 3 rotors, and be doing it in enough time to consistently hit your climb, and also how likely you are to slow down the other alliance, right? If both alliances are easily capable of 3 rotors, I'm not sure that it's so much worth slowing yourselves down to slow them down. You know, I think you might be better off just trying to outpace them and catch your 3 before they hit their 3, and then go see if you can keep them from being able to do their 3. But I'm also I prefer the conservative strategy, especially in early weeks. I think we'll see more of the combined bump and run, as he's calling it, defense as we get later in the season.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Evan. I would not be that gutty this early to say, oh yeah, I can definitely get 3 rotors every match, and I'm going to play defense while doing that, because I have no idea what defense I'm going to see. And it's hard to say so early that if an alliance is just around 3, they may have a magic match, and surprise, they have a 4-rotor match because it's the right combination of robots. And I'd rather do everything I can to ensure that I get as many match points as I can, at least this early.
Sorry, they just started the match.
I think you just got to be careful, right? That you don't give up, like you guys have been saying, your 3rd rotor just to play defense. By you going out of your way, are you actually slowing yourself down?
So, Justin, did you guys see a lot of this bump and run type stuff at your event? Or did you do it a lot? Because I know that's kind of probably what plays into your strategy best.
Yeah, the bump and run concept, I understand. I think it's not always effective. I would say typically we're playing offense, we're playing defense, we're doing one or the other. Sometimes you get the opportunity to do something smart on defense, but no, I would say for the most part I did not see a lot of that, and it's not something I necessarily am a big fan of.
Okay, interesting, cool. All right, so next up, oh, sorry if I'm shaking a little bit, the rotor's spinning, I'm trying to take off here. All right. So let's go on to our next question. Again, if you've got one for us, send it in with !Q. We'll answer it as best we can. So this is from a user Nuttyman54. I've heard that before. Evan, are you familiar with that username?
Maybe. Sounds
okay.
Familiar. I think he's a friend of mine.
So we'll point this toward Justin. Justin, how does a team like 118 approach a rebuild like they're facing now with regard to trying to make everything, like you said, improve everything for their next event and also fix the damage that was done?
I would say that there's probably nobody on 118 watching the show right now, and it's not because they don't like the show; it's because they're working. So the general answer is a lot of hard work. A lot of the damage that was done, I don't want to call it superficial, but it was stuff that I think we can replace. It was a lot of lightweight thin wall tubing and polycarb. that I think we can replace that pretty. I don't want to say easily, but within the time that we're going to have on Thursday. It's going to be, I think, within our 30-pound weight allowance without a problem. And then, yeah, there's obviously some outside of the damage. There's some improvements we want to make. I think there's some areas that we can do both at the same time, make improvements while we're placing stuff. So I'm not too worried about it. I think we'll be in good shape for Lone Star.
So as a team that doesn't have an unbag period because you're in a regional system, it's been a while for me, I know. How do you approach sort of what you take off the robot? Like, especially when your team made it into eliminations, you made it all the way through to the semifinals in 3 matches. You didn't necessarily have a ton of time with your robot after it was completed. So how do you guys like pick what to take off? Are you always mentally thinking about it, or do you just start picking stuff up as best you can?
No, I'd say we make very conscious decisions at the end of the tournament of, hey, what needs to go in the bag and what needs to come off. In our case, it's pretty easy. What needs to come off? All the damage stuff, of course, we ripped off. And then we call it the gear wall. It's the front wall that has our entire gear grabbing system. That had a lot of damage, and that's pretty easy to take off. So that piece came off to have a full rebuild basically back home. So yeah, just conscious decisions about that for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, that's good to hear. And I think we're all rooting for you guys to come back even better. I got to say that, I mean, certainly your YouTube views tell us that your robot may be one of the most watched or carefully looked at robots this year. And so I can't wait to see what makes that awesome machine even more awesomer. So here we go. All right. Let's go to our next question here for everybody. Again, keep sending them in. If we like them, we'll talk to them. This is from Dodar5092. The guys who played week 1, were the gears on the floor prevalent at most events? So this is, I'll start off. Nick, why don't you take this one? And then Clint, you went to an event and saw a lot of what happened. Why don't you tell us a little about that too?
Yeah, gears on the floor were totally a thing, but they were more often on the floor in the loading and retrieval zones than they were in front of the airship, because people were pretty careful about their placement, but fuel and robots and not totally perfect loading mechanisms were a nuisance, meaning there were a lot of dropped gears right in front of the retrieval zone. Probably double, I would say, were sitting in front of the retrieval zone because people just couldn't get gears into the robot, at least at the Tippecanoe event, and more of them than they were in front of the airship.
Yeah, I think that as we saw on Friday and Saturday morning, there was a lot of gears. I would say in the eliminations, they started to diminish, and there weren't as many on the ground during the eliminations. I did see one match where 5460 Strike Zone out of Lapeer, they were actually having their partners bring them gears and purposely offload them and drop them on the floor because they had probably one of the better ground intakes at the event, picking them up, and they were just staying down in that zone and placing them as their two partners just brought them to the other end, which was a really unique strategy, and it was working for them.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't see as many drop gears on the floor as I expected. I think we saw probably just as many dropped at the pegs as we did in the loading lanes, and unfortunately most of the ones that I saw dropped in the loading lanes weren't in our matches. We have a ground gear intake, and we were really hoping to be able to poach a bunch of gears from over there. You know, for the most part, the teams at our event were actually quite good about loading gears in the robot and not dropping them on the floor. But there were a couple that we were able to poach, and certainly we did a strategy where if our partners weren't going to put a gear on in autonomous, that we'd have them balance their starting gear on their bumper and drive away to go get their first gear, and we just go, 1, 2, 3, put a few gears on real quick. So that was really beneficial for us. So we would actually have our partners intentionally dropping gears on the floor, kind of like what Clinton was mentioning. Although not running cycles for us, we considered that, but there weren't really any teams that could drop gears that were worse at putting them on the peg than us. If that makes sense. Most of the teams that had the ability to drop gears off on the peg were actually quite good at putting them on the peg, and so there wasn't really a need for them to drop them on the ground for us.
Yeah. Justin, can you tell us a little bit about how your experience was? Because I think your gear intake is probably one of the more unique ones we've seen. And how has that sort of helped you with regard to gears on the floor this year?
Sounds like a similar story that Evan was saying. So we did the same thing with having partners drop gears. We were trying to snipe gears from loading station that got dropped, and we had some opportunities to do that. There wasn't a whole lot of gear grabbers at Hub City, so at 3587 they were grabbing gears, and they were doing the same thing of trying to snipe gears. Also, one interesting thing would be some strategy and eliminations of playing defense down there. You're playing defense right in front of that loading zone. Then a gear comes down, go grab the gear, place it really quick. So that was kind of a defense offense thing that 3587 was doing, and we kind of stole that from them. But yeah, there was gears all over the place. There was gears in our regional. There was gears in front of the airship. There was gears in the loading zone, of course, and even midfield. Sometimes we'd see some gears. So we tried to make use of it, being one of the few gear grabbers on the field.
Well, at least the audience saw the gears, and maybe not so much the drive teams in the center of the field, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. All right, let's go to our next question. We'll maybe do one or two more here before we end for the evening, because I am on an airship and standing. Boltman5137 says, did you see fouls in week 1 due to lack of vision, like a robot inadvertently touching another bot because they were blind? Anybody see that? Do you think blindness is the issue? Do you think it's other, like just the fact that the penalty is challenging, or maybe it's that they're inexperienced?
I saw a couple of penalties due to vision, although the penalty around the loading lane isn't. I don't think that's due to lack of vision, because that's you're defending near your airship and your alliance station wall. So I think it's actually easier for the defending team to see that line and stay away from it. If you're trying to go across the airship, it might get a little more difficult with perspective. Most of the blind hits that I saw were happening in the middle of the field where there isn't really any penalty associated with it. But the one instance that I did see, and unfortunately it happened in finals at our event, is one of the teams got stuck behind our airship, one of our opponents. They tried to drive around the back of the airship. I don't recall if they were playing defense or just trying to get out around the defense that we were playing. And they ended up getting hung up on the lift peg at the very back of the airship, and kind of caught there and had no idea where the robot was. Couldn't get out of it. And unfortunately, that also is the one lift station which has a rope on it. And so our alliance, took advantage of the situation and dropped a rope right on their robot for a free climb. And they didn't lose them the match, but it was one of the contributing factors. There were some other fouls that came into play that we won that match. And certainly that's not how we wanted to win a finals match, but it was a very prevalent example of a robot being blind and getting themselves into a situation that not only could they not get themselves out of, but cost their alliance some points.
Yeah, and I got to say, from the webcast I saw as well, I agree that I don't think vision was a huge issue. I think the bigger issue was folks moving into the loading zone to do something, bumping somebody, and then realizing that they died when they got bumped. Whether it's their C-rail comes unplugged, or they have a drivetrain failure or chain pops or what have you. They get stuck there, and then they're basically they're getting picked off for literally hundreds of penalty points at a time. I know that even in the practice matches going on here, we obviously didn't have refs going on or anything like that, but while I was watching, there were very few hits going on over in that neck of the woods, but there were some pretty big, sizable hits going on in the midfield, even on practice day, from just people trying to go this way and that way to send gears. So that's where I would be more concerned about. Anybody else want to chime in on this?
I like I said, I think the thing isn't penalties, it's just getting stuck. It's also people get stuck behind the airship on the far end, trying to go around the backside. It's really hard to see it, but not so much penalties back there, like I said, other than hurting yourself. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our last question for the evening here. This one's coming into us here now, right about now. All right, cool. Dodar asks again, refs seem really hesitant to call blockading. Can you ask Justin to speak on the multi-robot defense 118 had played against him? Sure, I can ask him. Thank you for your question, Dodar. That's great. Let's go to the next. Oh no, wait, sorry, no. so Justin, what do you want to talk a little bit about this? I definitely want to talk about this too. So.
Yeah, I think we did have some pretty rough defense played against us. I'm not faulting the teams playing defense against us in any way. I think that there were some occasions where I would have called that blockading. I will say that blockading is really difficult to call. Matches moving fast, robots are moving in and out of positions, and all of a sudden there's two robots that are kind of blocking an area of the field. Then they're not blocking an area of the field. Then they're blocking the area of the field. So I can understand why refs are maybe hesitant to call that. I do think because defense is so easy to play and can really shut down a large part of the gear game, I hope that refs get better at calling that. I also think that refs need to get better at calling pinning. The pinning, especially around the airship, I mentioned that playing D around the airship is easier than I thought. A lot of that came from the fact that teams can basically lock you into those loading stations, and you cannot move. Now the pinning rules say that after 5 seconds you got to back away 6 full feet, and you got to stay back away for 3 full seconds. That rarely happens. When teams are playing defense, they're usually not backing away and going 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. Just doesn't really happen. I think in order to make defense less such a big part of the game, which I would prefer to see more offense. I think that the refs could maybe plan on calling that a little stricter, and the same with blockading.
And as I've been a referee before, I haven't refereed this year, obviously, but blockading is basically got to be the hardest penalty to call, because it can really ruin your day if it gets called against you. I think it's a yellow card or a red card, right? It's like pretty, or at least a tech foul. It's very severe.
Looking it up.
Yeah, it's not a good penalty. So refs don't like calling penalties, and also First has a good record of having a lot of penalties that are very black and white. They're in this zone, you're in this zone, touch, penalty, easy, right? Blockading is completely a subjective call. You don't, there's no black and white at all in it, so refs don't want to call it. And Justin, you're talking about penalties or pinning. That is gotta be my number one pet peeve with referees. I mean, I don't want to say that the refs up here are good or bad, but like the refs up here have been calling it a lot or been very good in practice calling it. But if you've got a new referee, or maybe from a different area that doesn't value defense as much, it's very easy to sort of call pinning incorrectly, especially with the backing away. Or even worse is the silent pin count. My brother is also a referee, and he was famous for screaming loud enough during a pin count that you could hear from the upper deck. So Evan, do you want to talk a little bit about this too?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that this is probably this game lends itself to these kind of blockading shutdown strategies better than really almost any game since I want to say like 2011 was the last game that you really could get in there and have a couple of robots that completely cordon off part of the field and keep a robot from being able to get out. And because defense is so easy to play with these choke points, and you've got these blockading rules and pinning penalties that are hard to call, I think something's going to have to be done to clarify what situations constitute it at some point, because they really are overpowered even for the best teams and the best scoring robots to have somebody with a good drive base be able to come in and really shut down a large part of the game. And I think we have that blockading penalty pulled up, and it's actually just quote unquote just a yellow card. And no foul
for the Alliance.
Right?
Yeah.
And in playoffs that's for the Alliance, or I guess it would just be for the Alliance in general, right? Because it's it's
always for the Alliance.
It's by definition a multi-robot penalty.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I feel about that in terms of calling it, because it doesn't have any penalty points associated with, but a yellow card is still a really huge thing for a team or an Alliance to be carrying with them, especially with the airship, the pilot penalties and things like that could very quickly turn it into a red card.
But But I mean, it's
But
also.
I would like to see a warning or something given. You know.
Yeah. Go ahead, Clint. I think you had something here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I was going to say is, like, you're only going to see the blockading happen in eliminations, right? I highly, highly doubt you're going to see it in the qualification matches because, at that time you're trying to go for, 4 rotors to get the extra ranking point, or you're trying to go for the 40 kPa, for the extra ranking point. So I don't see teams working together to blockade the whole field necessarily during quals as much as you would see that, effort and combination of all 3 robots or 2 robots blockading during a limbs. And that yellow card, it's 1 yellow card. You got your pilot who sticks their hand out of the hole to grab a gear. Another yellow card, you just lost that match.
Yeah, and especially like you're basically guaranteed to have somebody in the question box, no matter what the penalty is. Do you want to say something, Justin?
Well, I was just going to say, I was a little off topic, but we're talking about yellow cards. I don't know if you guys knew this was a yellow card. Throwing a gear is a yellow card. So we had a match where
launching a gear.
Launching a gear, yeah. Our robot accidentally opened up our gear grabber during auton, and it flung maybe, I don't know, a foot and a half. That was a yellow card really early on in the quals, and man, we were terrified. We were terrified for a large portion of matches. We didn't even carry a gear in auto because we were worried about it happening again and getting a DQ. That one was surprising. I didn't think that would be a yellow card. Off topic.
Yeah, I got to say, seeing a little bit about that, I kind of think that might have been a little ticky-tack of a call, perhaps.
Overzealous.
Yeah. It meets the letter of the rule, but perhaps not the reason for the rule. But I was not that referee, so I will not change.
Bottom line is, yellow cards are scary, and we want to avoid them.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Well, do we want to add anything else on this topic before we end for the evening? All right, cool. Hearing no objections. Gentlemen, thank you once again for joining me on the show. It's been a pleasure. Justin, it's great to have you on, and we wish you and the rest of your crew the best of luck going forward for the rest of the season.
Same to y'all. We'll be watching.
Thank you. For everybody watching at home, thank you for watching. We're going to be back next week, same time. I won't be at the WPI district because it ain't happening again. But I think I'm going to go for a little bit of a ride in the airship for a while and see you all later. So everybody, thanks for watching, and good luck this week.